go-to meeting, so that's why I've got this thing all set up. We'll keep it really informal. I'm going to let our guests introduce themselves as they get started, as each of them get started with their presentation. They each have a presentation. We'll have a little bit of discussion after their presentations, just kind of, I'll pick their brains a little bit more based on what they've presented, and then it'll be open for broader discussion at that point. I'm recording the go-to meeting so that folks who weren't able to make it, August was really tough. Well, July and August were both tough for us to schedule this so it could work. So the recording will be a great resource for folks.
Absolutely.
But we have Jen Gastetic and Christopher Nelson with us today, and like I said, I'm going to let them introduce themselves as they get started. And Jen, I think we can just go ahead and get started with your piece now. And, and here's your clicker.
Great.
You can get going, and I'll get this going.
So I'm Jen Gastetic. I'm the Assistant Director for Open Innovation at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. Prior to that, I was NASA's Prizes and Challenges Program Executive for several years. So I've been eating, drinking, breathing prizes for a while. Chris has as well. We love them, but also are the first to admit that prizes are great for solving certain types of problems, but not all types of problems. So kind of the art and not the science of understanding what's a prizable problem is something that is of particular kind of interest to both of us as well. You can't just put a prize on any problem. So I'm going to give you a little bit of overview of public sector prizes to give you a sense of how the U.S. government has been using them over the last decade or so. This is actually an area where the U.S. government is a lead experimenter in something innovative, which is something super fun to work on. But we have about 10 years of experience in the federal government working on prizes and challenges. And the kind of underlying kind of philosophy behind incentive prizes is that one of the underlying philosophies is that kind of no matter what organization you work for, you cannot possibly employ all of the smartest people that could possibly add new insights to your particular problem, product, or service. And so open innovation prizes and challenges give you a means to tap into individual members of the public, folks you don't employ, entrepreneurs, small businesses, more traditional tools that might be available to you, like big contracts that you compete, or grant programs, or even partnerships that usually occur between large organizations, don't give you the ability to necessarily reach those people that might have the insight that can help unlock a particular part of your innovation life cycle. And so prizes and challenges are another kind of tool in the tool belt for people that have a portfolio of problems that they're trying to solve, and enable you to tap into an entirely new group of people in order to move towards solving those problems. They are not new. Prizes have been around for a long time. Napoleon had a prize for food preservation, where some canning techniques were actually invented. There was a prize that was offered by the UK government called the Longitude Prize. This is a great book, 100-page read for short flights, which is called Longitude. Great book that talks about.
And there's an exhibit about it at the Folger Shakespeare Library right now.
Right now, and the long and short of that particular prize is, at the time, they could measure latitude very accurately, but could not measure longitude. So they'd be running ashore too quickly. They have big problems with losing ships, people, goods, because they couldn't measure longitude while at sea very accurately. And the wisdom at the time said that it was going to be a star-based method, and that one of the big judges of the whole prize competition was the Royal Astronomical Society in the UK. So they very much believed that the method to solve that problem was going to be star-based. It ended up being that the method to solve the problem, a benefit of prizes, was a clock-based method that was invented by this guy, John Harrison, that essentially spent his whole life prototyping smaller and smaller versions of clocks that from that information you could derive a very accurate measure of longitude. This is not a best practice for a prize competition, though, because he was actually never officially awarded the prize, like the designation of being the prize winner, because the Royal Astronomical Society just didn't believe that it could be a clock-based method. They made him demonstrate it 3 times. These are like transatlantic voyages.
Yeah, this is like Age of Exploration.
Yeah, and he demonstrated 3 times, and he was like, the first time he was a little bit less than the target, but 2 other times he demonstrated it. and he still never was fully kind of, oh, that's not a best practice in prizes. But another really, really famous one is the Ortiz Prize. So all of you have probably heard of Charles Lindbergh, but most of you have probably not heard of the Ortiz Prize, which is actually why he flew across the Atlantic and conducted that prize, and conducted that flight. It was for a $25,000 prize purse that was open for 10 years and unclaimed. Lots of people died actually trying to do this particular task, and he was the first one to accomplish it in 1919. So prizes as a way to incent a particular outcome and a particular performance without necessarily specifying the pathway to get there, and assuming that you know the best pathway to get there, are a completely new tool for organizations to be thinking about using when they're trying to stimulate innovation towards big problems where we might not understand the best path to get to solution, but we're willing to pay for that solution. Prizes have a lot of benefits. I've talked about a couple of them just in these first two slides, but one of the major benefits of prizes is that you're able to set an ambitious goal. So something that the result in and of itself is a valuable result that you would like to see achieved, but you don't have to predict which team is going to do it, which is oftentimes what you end up doing through grants or contracts, right? You go through a whole solicitation process where people write down on paper based on past performance and technical approach, you know, what their approach is going to be to solve a particular problem, and you bet. You bet on one of those teams. You fund one of those teams to do the work, and you may or may not actually get the results that you want out of that betting process. And so with prize competitions, you legitimately only pay if someone does the thing that you've specified, and you don't have to pick a team. Lots of teams can compete, and sometimes it's the ones that you'd never expect. Like NASA had a challenge called the Astronaut Glove Challenge, and it was to build a better, more flexible astronaut glove. And the guy that ended up winning, one of the guys that ended up winning that prize competition had actually been a runway designer for most of his career. He was a costume designer, and he was just really good at stitching and came up with more flexible ways to actually stitch the joints of the gloves so that it reduced the amount of the rubbing and the amount of the friction, and what is it called when you get a blister? Searching for the word for the blister.
You literally broke your toe in India and couldn't come up with the word blister.
I know, yeah, I know. Sometimes I'm like, you know those companies that fly planes? Airlines. Just talk about it until you find the word. In a lot of prize competitions, you get results that you don't get through traditional tools. And so it's a great tool to complement the other tools that you have in your toolkit, but it's not right for every problem. So if there's like one person in the world, one researcher in the world that's the expert on this particular problem, and honestly, you just need to pay that guy to keep working on it, you're likely going to use a grant and pay that person to continue to work on it, right? That you have to have a sufficient open solution space, sufficiently open solution space, and the potential for out-of-discipline perspectives to add insights to a particular problem in order for it to be something that is a ripe type of problem for a prize competition, but it also has to be something where the incentives are aligned, where someone's willing to put their own skin in the game. Because with prizes, there's one or a few winners. The incentives are sometimes money, but we say that there are 4 Gs in prize competitions. The 4 incentives are the 4 Gs: gold, guts, good, and glory. So people participate for a lot of different reasons. Charles Lindbergh was not all about the gold when he was participating in the Ortiz Prize. It was a lot about guts and glory. I mean, the glory of that is why we remember him today for participating in that prize, not because he won $25,000. And so when we think about what types of problems or what types of markets or what types of areas make for good prizes, you also think about why it is that people are putting their time in, because they're not getting paid hourly. They're going to be reimbursed for less than they put in, 9 times out of 10. But that's usually because there's a market after. There's some sort of attention that they get for participating in the prize that is valuable for them. Oftentimes, it legitimizes their solution on a level playing field against other more established actors. So for entrepreneurs and for small businesses, it can be huge to be rack and stacked against other kind of more known entities and have legitimacy in a marketplace that potentially they didn't have prior to the prize competition. So those types of intangibles can be really important. It's why you see a lot of university teams getting involved in prize competitions as well. For students that are trying to kind of start companies out of school, for students that are trying to learn the technology development process. I'll run through a little bit later all the universities that we think most of these are APLU universities, but it could be an imperfect analysis that have participated in prize competitions that the U.S. government has offered to date. And most people that participate in prizes have never worked with government before. So this is one survey that NASA did after doing a pilot of prize competitions in 2008. These were online kind of crowdsourcing ones. So there's the ones where teams will actually build technologies and bring them to an event and demonstrate them head-to-head against one another to see who actually performs best, like under the gun at that particular event. Super exciting. Kind of these are the X-Prize style prize competitions. But there's also a lot of prizes that the U.S. government is running, universities are running, companies are running that are more online crowdsourcing type prize competitions where the solution that's being submitted is like a business plan or code or engineering drawings or things that don't require a physical prototype, right, but can be submitted like through your computer. Those are vendors like Innocentive, Topcoder, a variety of kind of these innovation intermediaries. What they do is they manage a community of people across the globe, and organizations can on demand ask that community of solvers for insights on a particular problem for basically a transaction fee, a posting fee, in many ways to access that community. And so that's the type of prize competition pilots that NASA did in 2008, where we found this result, which was that 80% of people that participated in those challenges had never even thought that they could work with NASA before, 80%. The Obama administration has been a huge supporter of prize competitions. Many prizes started during the Bush administration. NASA's Space Act Authority, which is the authority that it uses to conduct prize competitions, was actually passed in 2004 during the Bush administration. And the Obama administration has identified that these are really high risk but potentially high reward policy tools that are relatively low cost compared to other tools that U.S. federal government does. So they essentially shot it full of steroids and wanted agencies to use more of these prize competition approaches. And Congress agreed. In 2011, they passed the American Competes Reauthorization Act that gave all federal agencies, not just NASA, DOD, and DOE that had been the ones that had prize authority, specific prize authority prior to that, gave all federal agencies the ability to conduct prize competitions. So Congress also agreed. So what did I do? Okay. And since then, since 2010, one of the things that the U.S. government did was launched a one-stop shop for prize competitions. It's basically the storefront where the public can go and identify all opportunities to participate in prizes. It's called challenge.gov. It's like the grants.gov for prizes or the FedBizOps for contracts in the prizes space. Over 400 prize competitions have been conducted by the U.S. federal government since 2010. Every department and 72 agencies have conducted at least one prize competition. And they're getting progressively more sophisticated as they do more. So we're seeing a lot of agencies start with things like app contests and data visualization challenges in kind of the open data world. I call those the gateway drug to challenges because they're relatively easy to do, but they're addictive. So they will kind of learn their internal processes by doing an app challenge. They'll learn how to like get legal on board. They'll learn how to make their comms people not terrified of running a prize that could look like a waste of taxpayer dollars when Congress authorized the use of prizes. And they'll work out kind of any fear that front office folks might have in a new way of doing business through these relatively low investment type of prize competitions. And then you see them getting more and more ambitious. So an example of that, HHS started using prizes in 2010, and just this past year, that's Health and Human Services, just this past year they announced a $20 million prize competition between NIH and BARDA to develop new point-of-care diagnostic devices for antimicrobial resistant bacteria to make kind of more technologies available at point of care for folks so they don't have to wait 3 days to find out if they have C. diff before they get prescribed a really, really, high potency antibiotic to treat that particular antibiotic resistant bacteria. So that's a $20 million tech development, research, that's a major advance from a data competition that they had started doing about 5 years ago. I keep pressing the wrong button. Prizes do a lot of things. When I say possible outcomes, this comes from a Deloitte report. Deloitte studied in 2014 over 350 prizes that have been done in the public sector and philanthropic and university sector. So there's actually lots of universities, Chris will talk more about this, that are conducting their own prize competitions. So university teams will compete in other people's prize competitions. They will run prize competitions, or they will partner in some instances for prize competitions. So universities are participating in a lot of different ways in prizes, in very interesting ways that Chris will talk about more. But prizes can do a lot of things. They can be about developing stuff, so new ideas, prototypes, pilots, kind of more X Prize like where you're stimulating markets, where there may not be a product on the supply or demand side that exists, and you use a prize competition to do some market stimulation type of activities. But they can also be used, kind of the other axis of prize competitions is used for engagement. And you rarely see now a prize competition that doesn't have some sort of goal for engaging in communities. Whether it's you're trying to build prototypes but also at the same time raise awareness of a particular technology, you see multiple combinations of these outcomes. It's not like you design one prize that does attract new ideas and that's all it does. You're seeing prize designers across industry trying to do multiple things, get multiple outcomes out of prize competitions, which means that it's becoming a more sophisticated craft in order to know how to do that more effectively. I talked a little bit about this, I'm almost done, that there are a lot of roles organizations can play in prize competitions. You can be, this comes from a Harvard study of public-private partnerships as they relate to prize competitions a few years ago. Organizations can identify a problem that they have, that they need to encourage a solution to, and be the one that sponsors the prize purse, designs the problem statement, designs the rules, runs the thing, and makes the award. They do it all themselves. That's host. Coordinator is where you may actually identify that there's a problem space that a lot of different entities need to come together on, in identifying just kind of common targets for problems that would be useful to solve in that area, and you could coordinate kind of the problem definition process, but not necessarily be the group that actually hosts or conducts the prize competition that comes out of it. And then contributor, a great example of this is the Wendy Schmidt Oil Cleanup X Challenge. Right after the BP oil spill, X Prize decided that they were going to do a prize competition to increase the ability for ocean cleanup technologies to clean up oil at a rate 2 times greater than what kind of currently was available on the market. So they used a prize competition approach to try to push the marketplace to a place where they were actually getting 2 times the performance out of what was currently for $1 million prize.
Yeah, 1.1 or something.
Yeah, for $1 million. I mean, because the aftermarket was sufficient, right, in that area. But there was only really one test facility in the country that you could actually demonstrate oil cleanup technologies, where you had a big pool with oil in it that you could like measure and test and actually say objectively how one performed against the other, and it was a DOI. And so the Department of the Interior provided the test facility for that particular prize competition, even though it was X Prize led. So in that instance, you have a group being a contributor. And you can imagine that happening with universities too, where they have test facilities, or they have kind of unique labs or unique capabilities where they might be able to provide testing for particular prize competitions as well. So this is just a snippet of the universities that have participated in NASA's Centennial challenges. So this is not all of the prizes DOE has done. This is not all of the prizes DARPA has done, which there's a ton of university participation that happens in those prizes as well. So it's just to give you a sense that in the 8-year history of NASA's Centennial challenges, these are the universities that have enrolled as teams in NASA Centennial Challenge activities. Now, I highlighted West Virginia University because West Virginia University has been a winner of NASA's Sample Return Robot Challenge. So this particular challenge is about developing autonomous robots that can identify and retrieve samples from various locations and bring them back autonomously. This is meant to simulate kind of the technology that we would need for robotic sample return robots on Mars. So on Mars, we don't have things like GPS to help navigate. So you can't rely, these teams can't rely on GPS in order to get back to home. They have to use other navigation kind of approaches. They also can't use things like LIDAR, because our atmosphere is different than the Martian atmosphere. And so in order to operate like a robot that would work on the surface of Mars, they're constrained by different kind of technology limitations. You might use LIDAR as a way to actually hone in on something, identify and hone in on something in the distance. And so it was West Virginia University that actually is the first team to win a level 2 prize in that challenge, meaning they passed the first gate, and they participated in the scavenger hunt second round and collected enough samples to earn them $100,000 in prize purse. The total available through that was $1 million, which basically means that they only picked up 1/10 of the samples that they could have picked up. It was kind of the amount of samples you picked up was proportional to the amount of money that you won. But there's companies, there's all sorts of people competing in this challenge. 16 teams showed up, and it was West Virginia University that won this past year. It's the 5th year that this particular challenge has been run. The last point that I'll make on this slide, and then I'm done, is the allied organization here, so is WPI, so Worcester Polytechnic Institute. Another role that universities can play is actually being the administrator of a prize competition in partnership with the government. And so WPI runs the NASA Sample Return Challenge. They do that because WPI has been trying over the last 5-10 years to make themselves one of the premier robotics universities in the country. They won a NASA challenge a couple years ago that was robotics in focus, and they decided instead of being a competitor in the next NASA robotics challenge that they wanted to be the administrator of the next robotics challenge, to be kind of the convener for the robotics community and be seen and branded and associated a lot more with robotics as a discipline and the strength of their program to be able to run a challenge like this. And so they also do, annually when this event is held, they run an event called the Touch Tomorrow event, where the whole community, the whole local community comes out. NASA sends astronauts, NASA sends tech. They do the actual demonstration there. The actual competition happens during 2 days. And the whole community comes out and learns more about WPI, learns more about cool technology, gets kids interested in STEM. And they had, I think, something like 4,000 people show up this past year from their local community in Worcester, Massachusetts, around this event. That's a big deal. The governor came, like, big deal for them to be able to get that many people out because NASA was hosting a challenge at their university. So that is it from me, and I'll turn it over to Chris to talk more from the university perspective.
Thanks, Jen. Yeah. Chris, it'll take me a second to get this.
Yeah, not a problem. I'll just start by introducing myself. Like Jen said, we've both been working in prizes and challenges for a long time. I'm currently at Georgetown University, where I run a couple of different programs, including the Georgetown University Energy Prize, but before that I worked with the X Prize Foundation on prizes and challenges. I've actually worked with OSTP on promoting prizes and challenges for a number of different years, so I'm well steeped in this world. I wanted to, after Jen's kind of overview of what prizes and challenges are, how they work, and how the public sector is using them, I wanted to put in kind of my university hat and talk about how and why universities are using prizes and challenges. And this comes out of a number of different universities that are using prizes and challenges, but since I'm running a prize at Georgetown University, I will use our prize and our example to talk about that, but I'm sure that you'll see applicability more broadly in that. So when I think about the work of the university, and there are a lot of things that universities do, but teaching and learning, research and scholarship, collaboration between institutions, community engagement, local and global impact are all kind of on that list, and all amongst the reasons why we choose to do prizes. Like Jen said, there are a lot of different, on that slide that she had about the different potential outcomes, there are a lot of different potential outcomes for prizes. And in the Georgetown University Energy Prize, we have multiple of those outcomes built in. Same reason. There are multiple sort of core to our university mission reasons why we would choose a prize for a particular approach to something, beyond everything that Jen said, which is valid about why you choose a prize in general, to solve a problem, to source insight from a broader community, to do all of those things. I'm now looking at it through the lens of the university. So just as a quick background and introduction to the Georgetown University Energy Prize, because I'm going to use this as an example. This is a $5 million 2-year competition for a community that improves their community-wide energy efficiency. So we're looking at metrics like their municipal and residential electric and natural gas usage, and we're looking at small and medium-sized communities, and we're looking at innovative, replicable, scalable approaches. I can get into a lot more detail, but I want to move quickly, and it's not particularly relevant. You just needed to know that much background for me to get into this. And right now, we're actually right in the middle of building an interactive energy dashboard, which it turns out is a lot harder than you think it should be, for these 50 communities that will be competing for the next 2 years for that prize. But if I back up and I look at when we started this effort about 2.5 years ago in terms of the initial conception and design, you know, it really started from a very traditional university research. Gee, there's data that's showing us that there's a problem with energy efficiency adoption in certain communities. Why is that problem? And you know, I mean, it started very traditional kind of, we could have taken a number of different research approaches to that. And we could have, you know, analyzed the programs that were out there and perhaps what was working and what wasn't, or we could have done a policy analysis. We could have done all sorts of things to try and kind of get to the bottom of that, question. But at the end of the day, we decided to take a prize approach because we didn't want to just look at what existed. We could see from the aggregate data that what existed wasn't working. We wanted to actually have an impact, and we wanted to create new solutions that we would then study and analyze it like we would any other solution, you know, in a university research context. So just to kind of take that approach and put it into the thinking of, you know, a team of, we had physicists and public policy researchers who are all on this team putting together the prize. So, you know, came from a very kind of traditional place, but decided to break out of that mold. What that offered us the opportunity, though, was so much more from a university standpoint beyond just the research. We continue to have opportunities for teaching and learning through the prize that are, I think, unparalleled in the rest of the university in terms of providing students with hands-on opportunities to learn from real-world work that's being done, to participate in real-world work that's being done. 50 communities all across the country working on shaping energy efficiency programs and policies and research. And the interdisciplinary applications. One of my other hats that I wear at Georgetown is fostering greater interdisciplinary work. And one of the reasons why I started wearing that hat was because of the Energy Prize and because we were attracting such an interdisciplinary group of faculty and students who wanted to work on this. Like I said, we started with sort of the core of the science and public policy, but our urban and regional planning program has gotten involved in this. Our corporate social responsibility group and our business school has gotten involved with this. Our communications department, behavioral psychology. Turns out when you try and get people to change their energy habits, there's a lot of behavioral psychology that goes into that offers some interesting opportunities for learning and research and all of that. So really, really exciting opportunities that this prize has offered our university that go far beyond what maybe a traditional research project would offer, where maybe you would have some students working in a science lab or some students gathering, you know, behavioral surveys or something like that. There's so much more to it that this has offered us. Also the opportunity to collaborate with public agencies. We have a formal MOU with the Department of Energy. We work very, very regularly with the EPA. Anytime you're working with energy data and climate data and all of that, those two agencies are essential to your work. But these are just some of the logos of nonprofit organizations, foundations, corporations who are currently working with, have worked with on the prize. And you know, I mean, in terms of providing us with connections, providing us with something that universities are always looking for, new sources of revenue. It's really been quite phenomenal in terms of attracting that type of collaboration. And in terms of community engagement, 60 cities and counties, 100 plus local government agencies, over 1,000 K-12 schools, and there's a big K-12 component of the prize, which again, I'm not getting into specifics, but believe me, it's significant. Nonprofit organizations, universities, which I'll talk about in a minute, utilities all over the country. We've got that representation across 26 states, and those communities encompass about 4 million people. So in terms of the outreach and engagement on, for us, a national scale, but I'll give a couple of other examples of doing it more locally or with more specified audiences. But in terms of a community or a university that's looking to get outside of itself and looking to create that broader engagement and that connection with the communities that we serve, a prize competition and a way to engage and stimulate those ideas, it's been pretty fantastic. So then, the impact, and ultimately what we're looking for and what any prize is looking for is outcomes and impact. And the level of sophistication that prizes can get to, and the thing that Jen didn't talk about in her evolution of public sector prizes, and starting with apps challenges, and a lot of universities have run apps challenges. Heck, universities have run business plan challenges for hundreds of years. That's not new or different for a university to think about running one of those challenges. But a really sophisticated prize like this, where you're going for innovative new approaches to a problem that has been stuck for 30 years, you're going for immediate outcomes in terms of actual changes in energy consumption and carbon emissions and financial implications of energy usage. You're going for awareness and education, dare I say even trying to create some long-term policy and behavior change, which we're already seeing in some of these communities. And ultimately, our ambition is to change the way the U.S. uses energy, which is something that public sector agencies are moving towards as well. And in fact, we're hosting an event in just a couple of months that we're both working on, where the whole theme of the event is more ambitious prizes. Let's move from the apps challenge, the engineering challenge, the business plan challenge, to a more ambitious challenge where we're thinking about how to change the way we live, the way we work, the way we use energy, the way we interact with computers and technology. There are so many opportunities, and to echo something Jen said at the beginning, not every problem is prizable, and not every problem should be prized. And when I say more ambitious prizes, I'm not making the argument that everything should or could be prizable, but we are now at a level of sophistication with prizes where we can start thinking about how to tackle more ambitious challenges through really sophisticated integral prize competitions that look at a number of these different outcomes and impact. So that's sort of our story, why the university did it, and why we're, what we're looking for out of that. I want to come back to this idea that one of the things that we really didn't know about when we launched the Georgetown University Energy Prize was whether or not other universities would want to get involved in that. We hadn't done something like this. No other university had done a prize quite like this before. We didn't know. This is just a sampling of the universities in those 50 communities across the country that are actively involved in their community's effort to reduce their energy consumption and win the Georgetown University Energy Prize. And the ones that I've bolded are universities that are leading their community's efforts through a combination of faculty, students, and administration to compete for the Georgetown University Energy Prize. So our engagement with other universities and our ability to foster some broader collaboration with some of these universities has been tremendous, which we as a university really value on a number of different fronts. I'm going to come back to that slide in a minute because I want to end on that. Well, no, I'll talk about that. So as Jen said, there are a lot of universities that use different prizes and challenges in a lot of different ways. And like I said, prizes and challenges as a fundamental tool are not completely foreign to universities. But I gave you the example of the prize that I'm running and why our university decided to get into it. There are two others, just for the sake of time and we could have done a long list, but just for the sake of time and relevance, these are two very, very current prize competitions from universities. The UCLA Grand Challenges program that they started 3 or 4 years ago now, and now has two prizes that they're launching, a Sustainable LA competition, which is very local, very based on how do we develop solutions for a hotter, drier, dare I say, unsustainable LA. And then a completely different grand challenge around depression, how we diagnose and treat depression, but two, problems that a university would, could have tackled in a very traditional manner, but decided to launch a prize to get more ideas, engage with their broader community, get more collaboration, and work on in a new way. And then the Tulane Nitrogen Reduction Challenge, which is, again, all about their local environment down there in Louisiana, problems with the wetlands and depletion of nitrogen and all sorts of issues surrounding that. They've got a prize, again, to not just tackle that in a traditional university way, but engage in that broader conversation and engage in a more impactful, innovative process to tackle that challenge.
And just to piggyback off that real quick, one thing that's really interesting about that one, when I mentioned the 3 roles, host, coordinator, contributor, a few years back, there was a White House and EPA-led kind of workshop around nutrient pollution, recognizing that nutrient pollution was a big problem in the U.S. What is nutrient pollution? When farmers use fertilizers, which are things like phosphorus and nitrogen in order to enrich their soil, that stuff runs off into waterways, and it creates more nutrients in water than that water is used to having. So you see things like algal blooms that were a big problem in Florida last year, a big problem in Lake Erie last year as well, that then contaminate the water, the drinking water, for folks locally. And we don't, know how to very accurately and cheaply measure levels of nutrients that are currently in water or in soil, nor do we really know how to clean it up. And so a few years back, they did a coordinated kind of a problem definition workshop to look at the issue of nutrient pollution. Lots of people cared, cross-sector, about that topic, and 3 prizes have spurned out of that discussion. So the first is one that's actually being run by the U.S. federal government. EPA and NOAA are running one that's to develop low-cost water sensors. So trying to get at the $2,000 price point for sensors that can measure nutrient pollution in water. Tulane is contributing by coordinating a prize competition that's around measuring nitrogen pollution, specifically in soil. That one's more land-based that complements the water-based one. And then the Everglades Foundation in Florida, a foundation, is running a challenge that is much more around cleanup that specifically matters to them. But all of those groups get on bi-weekly calls and coordinate what they're doing in this space together, and have created kind of a micro-prize community around challenging around nutrient pollution as well.
No, that's a great example and a great effort, and certainly I could have gone into a lot more depth about the ways that we're working with EPA and DOE on complementary efforts that they're doing that work very closely with us and regular coordination with other organizations. That's a big part of what we're doing and why we value this. I just wanted to close by coming back to what you had put up with one addition to the kind of the roles of a university in prizes. The host, which we've talked about, I've given the example of Georgetown and others who are developing and implementing our own prize. A coordinator, which I could see a university, and actually after running a prize, maybe we should have gone this route, where come up with an idea, design it, and then hand it off to somebody else to run. It's looking more and more attractive every day for some reason. I'm kidding. There's so many benefits to being a host. I don't want to scare anybody off from that. But then being a contributor, and this is where Jen talked about this too, but I see a lot of opportunities for, with my broader university hat on, for universities to be really, really profound contributors to prizes as experts, as thought leaders, as testers, as judges, as a lot of different things. And then finally, participant, which Jen talked about, but I wanted to really highlight as the roles of the universities in prizes, because I think that for a university, that can really be a gateway drug, right? That can really be a, hey, we had students compete in this, we had faculty compete in this, we had a combined team work on this prize, and we had a good experience with it. Oh, maybe we should try a small prize of our own, and so I just wanted to highlight that. And certainly we, as a host, have had really great experiences thus far with participating university teams. And so it runs the full gamut, and I think that's really, really valuable. So with that, I want to transition it back over to Jim, and I know we took up more time than we said we would, but
yeah, thanks a lot, Chris. And just by way of time, we did put this on the calendar for 90 minutes. If you don't have 90 minutes, though, we certainly understand if people have to kind of get up and wander out as we're continuing the discussion. But I think you both are available until half hour to the hour, so we'll have as much time for discussion as possible. And I want to get that started. I just would like to start with a couple of questions of my own, and then maybe we can open it up at that point. So I think that I actually have a question for you, Jen, which is, you talk about all these advantages of kind of the crowdsourcing and getting lots of new ideas. It seems to me that there's a significant cost that comes with that, though, as well. It's a lot different than just hiring a team and having them figure something out, right? You have suddenly a lot more people to manage. You have a lot of information to process. So I guess, how do you deal with, there must be sort of a signal-to-noise ratio that you've got to kind of deal with in a way that you don't have to deal with if you're just sourcing something to an individual team. So I'm just kind of curious about that.
Yeah, right. So when you come back to the problem or the product or the service that you're trying to get, like the problem that you're trying to solve, if you know how to solve that problem, you know what the steps are to most effectively get you that solution that you need, and you know who your performers are, then you're going to do a grant or a contract. But there are overhead process kind of costs associated with running a contract or a grant. I mean, in the U.S. federal government, doing a big contracting process is not free either. There's lots of people that it takes to actually write the darn thing. The evaluation and review panels can take a long time and lots of people, and then the oversight of contracts, and grants are things that cost people time as well. But if you know who the performers are and you know the steps to get to solution, then those overhead costs are totally justified, right? Because you're getting to the solution that you need for that particular problem. If you're in a different type of problem area, though, where it's not clear, like you would have a hard time writing requirements for a contract, and you don't know who the performers would be, it becomes a lot harder to actually then than even go through that overhead process. So with prizes, you spend a lot of time thinking about the results you're trying to generate. It's a very, very front heavy on problem definition. So, and you actually, what's surprising to a lot of people that go through a prize design process is just how much time you spend in problem definition And a lot of times people think they understand the problem, and they go through a problem definition process through prizes, and they're like, oh crap, you know, I never asked that question in my thinking about this for 30 years. Now that I have that insight, I actually now know better how to use my traditional tools. So I would say maybe out of 10, say there's 20 ideas for prizes that come across my desk in like a month, hypothetically, and 5 of those are good enough that we start workshopping them and thinking about, you know, asking some of the, you know, top 20 questions that you ask when you're starting to do problem definition. Maybe 1 or 2 of those would actually result in a really solid, good prize. And the other 3 that we workshopped may result in more solid contracts, grants, or partnerships, or identifying new potential partners that they hadn't identified before.
And that's that part of figuring out whether something is prizable.
Whether something is prizable. And so I will say there is definitely work on the problem definition side and kind of on the prize design side that is more front-end stuff than, at least in the government, people are used to putting into like what they write into a contract, which is sad, but it's reality. And so on one hand, there's that work. On the second hand, there's the running of the actual prize. If you get to that point where you're like the 1 or 2 out of 20, it's a good, solid prize idea. It's going to be run. There are, you know, there is a burden associated, just like there's a burden associated with running a contract or a grant. There's a burden associated with running a prize. So there certainly judging is one of can be one of the biggest processes depending on how many proposals you get in. But you get in proposals with contracts or grants too that also need to be evaluated. You tend to get in more through prizes in some instances, and there is more tail ends in the distribution, right? So you, like with a prize competition, you're hoping for on the bell curve, you're hoping for the ones at the really good ends, the breakthrough ideas, but you get a lot of stuff in the middle, and you get some stuff that's just crap. Like, and that's to be expected.
Exactly.
With a prize, like going in, you know you're going to get some crap, you're going to get a lot of stuff that you kind of already knew, but you do it for those like 2 or 3 things that are at the tail end that you would not likely have gotten otherwise. Right. And so you're putting in that additional work in order to get that tail end. Right. And for the bigger technology development and demonstration prize, we say like a rule of thumb is that the operations of the competition are going to cost you about the same amount as prize purse. Like that's a rough level of estimate from like the years of XPRIZE experience in that area. With online crowdsourcing ones, it's less than that. It's less than the kind of equal to prize purse amount when you're talking about things that are more like $100,000, $50,000 to $100,000, up to $1 million in purse. But it depends on the type of prize that you're running. But they are not free to run.
Right. And
anyone that tells you a prize is free to run because it's not. It takes work. It takes people to run it. Georgetown had to hire Chris when they decided to run, or when they thought about running the Georgetown University Energy Prize, and he has interns and students that are helping him run it.
Though that is the advantage of doing a prize in the university setting, lots of free labor.
Yeah.
But if I can just add one thing to what you were saying about that distribution, that bell curve, you know, there are ways to design for that and to design out some of the crap in a way that you couldn't do through a contract in the federal space, or would be hard to do in a university traditional research sense. You know, we had to get to that 50 communities, we started with about 200 or so who contacted us originally, and we had successively harder sort of application stage, plan stage that kind of naturally weeded them out, and then we selected some of them out. And then even within the 50, we've got a great diversity of community, the work that the communities are doing. I'm really, really excited about it. But, you know, we have some of them that are taking a pretty traditional approach, and I'm not sure how much we're going to learn from those. But we have some that are trying some really crazy stuff, and some of them aren't going to work at all, but some of them are, and that's why you do that. So you can design for that in the design of the prize.
Chris, I have one other question for you before we open it up, which is, you know, you talked about some of the long-term outcomes that you'd like to see of the energy prize, which are really behavior change and use of energy differently in communities across the country. It seems to me like one of the things that you might have a challenge with in running a prize is that you get, even if it's not a point solution, or you don't want it to be, you are getting in that particular case, you're getting a solution that's pretty unique to a community. And so how does one deal with, there's two things, I think. One is, how do you make sure that you're coming up with a solution that is adoptable and scalable and replicable? But the other thing is how do you keep from creating the mentality that, oh, well, they were able to do it because they are them. And, you know, help people use the prize as a leverage to help other people see that they can adopt these solutions as well.
So that's a really good point. And we, in fact, tried to design that into the prize from the beginning. I've worked on prizes in previous organizations I've worked for where you got a point solution that didn't go anywhere because it wasn't viable in the marketplace or all sorts of different reasons. So we actually designed a two-phase end to our competition. Let me start at the beginning. One, we started with looking at communities that looked like America. We looked at small and medium-sized communities. We looked at different types of small and medium-sized communities. The communities that we have in terms of population and demographics represent roughly 68% of the American population lives in communities similar to the communities we have in the competition from demographic size and some other factors that we looked at. So we tried to select for communities that were diverse and would give us that, would not say, oh, that's a unique unicorn over there, and just because they did it, we did. We tried to look at that diverse field, and we have it. And then at the end of the competition, there's actually a two-phase ending to the competition. The first, so we're collecting all of this data, which is my nightmare right now, getting 50 communities worth of data from 100 plus utilities and trying to get it all to talk to one another is nigh impossible, but we're doing it. Good thing for students. But the data will only determine the communities who get into the final round, and we will, based on their performance in the data phase of the competition, which is the next year and a half, we will select 10 to 12 communities that will be our finalists. Those communities will all be viable solutions. So even though there's one prize winner, all of those solutions are solutions that we will highlight, that we will look to replicate and scale. And ultimately, the final report that they have to submit, the judging that we have to do, is based on a number of criteria, two of which are replication and scalability. So we're explicitly looking for that in the community. So if there's something about a community that makes it so unique that will never be replicable, our judges will not select it.
Great.
So
well,
try and design for that.
So let's open it up more broadly. The folks who are on the web conference, I am going to unmute you. I just ask that you try to keep the ambient noise around you down, and if it gets too much, we'll just mute you again, and you can let us know in the chat window if you have something that you want to add. But who has a question for Jen and or Christopher? Catherine?
Megan.
Megan.
What's the role of openness in the prizes that you've run, and your thoughts on that generally, that solutions need to be available to the public, to the community for a fee, or they have to be available for free, or the architecture behind the solution published?
Really good question. As a key, when we go through problem definition on the front end, one of the key questions that we have the seeker answer is what they want to do in the solution, because that will influence the intellectual property regime that a prize competition is run under. So in some instances, like NASA will be looking for a particular material testing approach, for example, that they need to be able to use in the lab. And so in that case, they don't really care if it's an open solution. They need to be able to get a license for it to use it. And so in the intellectual property kind of like regime and the rules, you need to specify upfront to the solution providers how the seeker, what you're basically signing up for if you win. Because with some of these vendors, you can actually transfer IP, so ownership can go to the seeker. That happens a lot when like the pharmaceutical industry is using online crowdsourcing to try to, or online open innovation to try to find, a kind of insight specific to their manufacturing process or to their research process that they want to incorporate into their approach, so they own that solution. When it comes out, they get the IP. There are other challenges where it's not about the seeker needing to immediately infuse and use the technology as a first customer, or even like only customer because it's part of their market strategy, but where they're trying to stimulate a marketplace and they're trying to help new technologies enter the market where they're only one of many potential buyers. And in that case, you would make a very explicit decision up front that you do not own the intellectual property, the teams do. But then it's maybe potentially still not open, right? The teams own it, but the seeker has no rights to the intellectual property. If they want that, they go out and procure it after the competition is done. Because a lot of times the technologies that are coming out, too, of some of these things aren't necessarily viable quite yet. They might be a technology readiness level like 4 or 5, but what like the agency would be purchasing is like 6 or 7. And so if these people are then forced to go through a follow-on procurement, it can help force along the maturity of their technology a little bit more to get it kind of ready. But you see lots of challenges where when teams sign up, like they are agreeing that if they win or if they participate, that their solution is in the public domain. You see that a lot in apps competitions, in coding competitions, a lot in kind of the software space. And if your goal is a lot of community development and community engagement, and you know that part of the incentive for someone to compete is that a better solution becomes available to the whole community, regardless of who contributes it, then that can be part of the incentive structure that you think about when you're setting up kind of the what do you want to do with the solution and who needs to be able to use the solution at the end of the day in order for it to get the most value out of it.
Do you see differences in the way that university-based and university-sponsored or sanctioned teams approach prizes versus the commercial sector or individual?
Yeah, so it varies. A lot of the teams, sometimes you see teams come out of prize competitions that come out of universities where they're setting up new companies. So like out of the Google Lunar X Prize, for example, there's a company called Astrobotic that is competing in the Google Lunar X Prize, which is a prize to go to the moon, send a lander to the surface of the moon for $25 million. It's sponsored by Google. I think it's UPenn or Pennsylvania State,
yeah.
That a faculty member and students spun off a new venture called Astrobotic that is associated with the university, but is a new company associated with the university to compete in the Google Lunar X Prize. And that team actually that formed for the Google Lunar X Prize, likely no one's going to win the Google Lunar X Prize, but you've got lots of teams and companies forming around it that are now in the space industry, where Astrobotic just won a partnership with NASA last year for the development of lunar landers. So they're still competing in the prize competition, but now this university spin-off team is in a partnership with NASA that if they hadn't formed as a commercial entity through that other prize, they likely wouldn't be in a partnership with NASA. And so most universities have an interest in spin-offs, spin-outs, whether it's the IP that's created in their labs or whether it's, or faculty have interest in creating side projects for other revenue as well. So it depends.
Well, I think that's true of the technology prizes. If I can offer just for a different type of prize, our prize, which is all public domain. There are things that we have agreed to keep confidential during the competition, but everything will be published afterward. Because the whole point is replicability, and you can't do that unless you're putting solutions out there. But the university teams in particular who are participating are doing it oftentimes as a catalyst for their own research. So for our prize, it's because they're working on an energy, they've got an energy lab at the university, or they're doing public policy research or work. And so they're participating in our prize because it's advancing their own.
They may be using government-funded grant contracts to compete in a prize.
Absolutely, yeah.
I have a question. How do you deal with transparency issues in the judging?
Really good question. I thought where you were going with your question on openness was more on the fairness bent, so good follow-up. Fairness is huge in prize competitions, and that's where in rules specifying explicitly how solutions are going to be judged and making that process transparent from the beginning so people know what they're going to be evaluated against is critical in prizes, because a recognition by the teams that they were able to compete on a level playing field is a big, in fact, sometimes a metric that a lot of competitions use is the perceived fairness of the prize competition at the end of the day when they go back and ask the teams, how did you feel about participating in this particular activity? And so there's a balance, though, because at least in the federal government context, prizes are an entirely new tool. They're not a contract. They're not a grant. They're something entirely new. So what happens if there's a protest? Contracts get protested all the time. When company X says company Y shouldn't have won and they should have won, and they'll go and protest, and then you have the lawyers looking at evaluation forms and determining whether or not the award has to be overturned and whether or not it was a fair evaluation process. Out of the 400 prizes that have been done by the federal government to date, only one has been protested. And that was an FTC challenge called the Robocall Challenge, where there was a guy that didn't even rank that thought his solution was way better than the winner, and protested it to the GAO, which is the group within the federal government that you protest contracts to. GAO came back and said, we don't have purview over prizes because it's a different thing. This is not a contract. And so the guy took it to court and protested it in court, and he protested that he didn't think the judging process was fair. And so the whole, and it ended up being that FTC won in court. But the whole, it came down
because it was fair, or they
down because they followed the stated judging practices. So it was not, whether or not that way of judging was the best way to judge. It was that they followed the way that they said they were going to do it.
Or the contract matter.
Yeah. And so in that particular case, and this is now what I tell anybody who's running a prize competition, be clear enough in what you write down as your judging process. You've got to follow that, because that's the type of thing that could get you in trouble in litigation down the road if you're making changes within your judging process along the way. But back to the point of perceived fairness and how people feel about participating and whether or not they felt that the process was fair. That's why you're transparent throughout the process. 1 of 400 have protested it. It's remarkably low compared to how many contracts get protested, right? Because people feel differently about their participation in prize competitions.
And the only thing I would add to that is yeah, publish it up front, be very, very clear, but you're going to have to change it. But have a open and fair, transparent approach to change
Communicating
it.
that.
Communicate it. Involve your competitors in the process of changing it. Give them an opportunity to comment on it. You don't have to take their comments, but give them an opportunity to do that, because that transparency is absolutely critical.
Mm-hmm.
How do you select judges for that then? How do you select judges to follow those, to be the referees?
Good question. It depends on the type of prize competition.
Yeah.
So if it's a technology development and demonstration one, you'll usually have a judge that's there to literally take the measurement that's being the oil cleanup rate that you're seeing during the and it's very objective. So there's objective judging and there's subjective judging. Objective judging is when there is data that is being collected and you need someone essentially to validate the accuracy of that measurement that's being taken. So in that case, judges will look they're checklisting, and they're objectively kind of following the data collection requirements. I mean, those judges can come from a variety of different places, but they're usually experts in the technology. On the subjective side, where you have people submitting, approaches to things, engineering design drawings, things that are less objective, there's some subjectivity in who's going to win. The biggest part, the most important part of selecting your judges in that case is that you don't pick all the usual suspects that are always the ones that review your grant and contracts, because you're going to peer review out the innovative ideas. And so you have to think about having some experts on the group, of course, but then having some diversity in thinking on the panel as well. Otherwise, you just have another grant or contract process. If it's the same people that were evaluating your prize submissions as would have been evaluating your grant or contract submissions.
Yeah.
Yeah, Casey.
First of all, thank you guys for coming, because this is a space I knew nothing about, and I feel like I have a good kind of overview now, so thank you. And Chris, you talked a little bit about this, but I think So one of the things we really struggle with are these scalable ideas that are about changing behavior. We know what works, but it's getting people to do it. Also, a lot of the space we work in, one example would be more active learning in undergraduate courses, right? So there aren't great metrics for knowing who's being successful, so it's often process-oriented, like, who are having the stakeholders come to the table and who are, those sorts of things. So getting back to your sort of, are prizes the right, should we even be considering if we, if you're trying to work in a system in which there aren't necessarily internal incentives to keep it going, for these kind of trying to change behavior and get people to implement what works?
Yeah, so a few different thoughts on that. One, the Energy Prize is very much a behavior change prize. It is very much a technology adoption prize, not a technology invention prize, right? So I say all the time, and I didn't really get into my overview about the Energy Prize, but I'll say one of the things that I always say, which is the technology of energy efficiency exists. It's that technology is not being adopted. For the most part, the programs and policies of energy efficiency exist, but they're not being adopted. So our prize is really about adoption. But one of the very, very early conversations we had, and it took us 6 months to figure it out, is what's the right way to measure that? And what are the metrics? And we had a lot of out-of-the-box and in-the-box thinking. And the reason why we ultimately settled on, and this will take off on Jen's last comment, we have both objective and subjective measures, right? The objective measures are you reducing your energy consumption as dictated by the energy data that you are submitting? So there's actually something that you can measure there. And we spent a lot of time figuring that out. So what I would say in terms of, if you're going to measure something that is behavior change, you have to figure out an objective proxy for that behavior change. What objective measure will change if the behavior changes? Because it is nigh impossible to measure actual behavior change. You have to figure out what will change as a result of that behavior change. That would be my first piece of advice. And then my second piece of advice is in terms of the replicability bit. That, I think, is where you can get a little subjective, and where you can look at, it's a design competition to a certain extent, and are you designing for replicability? And you can bring in experts and some wild cards and some other folks to kind of look at that objectivity. The other thing I would say on the judging is absolutely don't pick just the usual suspects. Find people who are like 3 degrees removed, who have enough, enough similarities in their work that they can relate it, but they're coming at it from another industry or another sector or another something, and can offer a unique perspective that challenges the usual suspects you do have in the room. That'll make for a much more entertaining judging process. It'll make for a much more engaged judging process.
I just want to check to make sure that the folks who are on the GoToMeeting, just to remind you that you're welcome to chime in if you have questions. So Marlena or Natalie or Venkat, the only thing is if you've muted yourself, you have to unmute yourself, because I can't do that on this end. But feel free to jump in with questions. Jane?
Excellent presentation, thank you. I wonder what might be best practices for recruiting applicants for a prize that are outside of your traditional networks and the people you generally communicate with?
Yeah.
That's where you might get your best ideas.
Totally. So we say that if you build it, they will not come. Like, communications and marketing are huge in a prize competition. So when I said earlier associated with cost, judging is a man-hour. It takes a lot of man-hours, and man-hours take cost. Communications and marketing, strategy, planning, and execution take man-hours and sometimes money. If you're doing like ad buys, if you're doing actually targeted kind of media placements for things, which some prizes do, depending on who you're trying to reach. But doing an upfront communication strategy and then the implementation of that strategy is something that's non-negligible in terms of upfront planning and then actual time it takes to implement throughout. That's one of the biggest things that you do throughout the early stages and the kind of life of the implementation of the competition is the communications and marketing part of a particular challenge. There's been research done by Harvard, Kareem Lakhani, who's looking at prizes for a long time. He's one of the leading academics kind of in the open innovation space. And he's found through Innocentive specifically, which is only one of the kind of open innovation online crowdsourcing intermediaries. There's many others, dozens of them that exist that have different types of communities, has found that oftentimes the solver for the problem that the seeker has posed can be 7 degrees removed from who we think is going to solve. So that creates a marketing issue because from a comms perspective, you put together target audiences, you put together channels to reach those target audiences, like there's ways that you do communication strategy. So if your target audiences are not necessarily the same people that are going to be the solvers that actually solve your problem because they're unknown to you because they're 7 degrees removed, it is really important to build in network approaches, social media, not just social media, but other ways of enabling others to spread the word through their degrees of connections to find other potential participants in competitions. You go to events where there are people that you want to recruit to participate. You do specific email marketing to folks that you know that may not be the person to participate but are influencers. You go to, your celebrity endorsers for a particular challenge that might reach communities that you could never reach. It's expansive in many ways, depending on the type of challenge you're trying to run, right? So if you're building your own challenge, you're doing your own marketing, you're doing like a Georgetown University Energy Prize type challenge, that's a lot of communications and marketing work that goes with promoting your own prize. Some of the reasons why agencies choose to contract with these groups like Innocentive or Topcoder or Kaggle or these folks that their business is around running challenges is because they have a built-in community already. So you are just paying a transaction fee to get access to their built-in community that likely has, 60 or 70% of the people that you would want to compete in the challenge anyway that are from multiple disciplines. And your extra communications and marketing, the NASA press release, the NASA whatever, gets the additional folks attracted to participate in that community. And so in that case, if you can pay basically a fee to get access to a ready-made community that might require less communications and marketing on your side than if you go it alone. So there's lots of trade-off decisions that you make at the front end when you're running a challenge, just how much you want to outsource and how much you think is important to do yourself, depending on the outcomes and the goals of your particular prize.
So that suggests that there is a sector in the prize market of people who make their living.
There are, in some areas, on Topcoder, for example, which is a 500,000 person community globally that are coders, there are people that, make over $1 million a year as coders, only competing in Topcoder challenges. And they're just really proficient coders. They don't work for anybody. They compete in Topcoder challenges and they do damn good. And so they make their money that way.
Let me add to that just a little bit from my perspective, and what you were saying about you go to the events and you go to the places. One of the strategies that was incredibly successful for us was partnering with the organizations where the community, National Association of Counties, National League of Cities were two of our biggest outreach mechanisms in terms of Georgetown University doesn't have city government officials in our network. We've never done anything with that, but we found the places where we had them. But then we worked really hard to, find the network of sustainability directors and the network of, small nonprofit environmental groups and the network of et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So finding those allies can be really, really helpful, especially because as a university, we didn't have any of those natural networks. We didn't have any of those natural outreaches. And we ended up hiring, we even ended up hiring an outside PR firm because, and this isn't talking out of school, our communications department said, listen, we're really good at promoting the work of the university and our students. We're not good at doing this. we can't help you. And we said, thank you. I mean, thank you for being honest. We'll go find the people who can help us with that. So that's really important. The other thing that I would say that's related to this, but it's important to think about, is defining who can participate in a prize is a really interesting challenge, especially when you're dealing with non-technology, even when you're dealing with technology challenges, but when you're dealing with other types of challenges, defining who can make up the team, who is the team, how is that, I mean, for us, didn't take us as long as problem definition, but took us a very long time. Eligibility. The eligibility was, and that is related to who you outreach to, is who is eligible, and some of those things. And you don't want to limit yourself because you want those outside ideas, but you also have to have some restrictions, or it gets crazy. So
I did just notice that we did have questions from the people that were on the webinar. They were just submitting them via the chat window. We don't have a lot of time, but I want to take one of them because I think it's sort of a follow-up to this. And then before we wrap up, I know we want to talk about a couple of ideas about things that universities, APLU and or universities can do to help. Chris, I know that you were just creating a network of universities, and you got some stuff from OSTP. So we'll get to those in just a second. But the question that Marlena submitted here is she'd like to hear more about, and this I think is along the lines of what we were just talking about, recruiting and outreach to participants, what best practices exist for recruiting, paid ads, targeted emails, and so forth. And then I think this is the follow-up part, converting interest to actual eligible applicants. It does seem to me like, and that may be related to that first question I asked about signal to noise. You end up, when you open it up and you do a good job promoting, you may end up getting a lot of people and you have to sort for eligibility.
Can I start by addressing that one? So, and we both talked about this a little bit, is designing that sorting mechanism where you have, and the way we did it is we had various phases that got increasingly more difficult for the potential competitor. So we didn't necessarily have to select them out, they selected themselves out. So got about 200 inquiries via email or our web form or phone calls that we logged in our system. And then we had a formal letter of intent, which wasn't that much more difficult, but required a signature of a local official. That got us down to about 100 because getting an official signature took some work. And then we had a formal application process which required signatures of all of the key stakeholders within the community, the utility, the government, the local nonprofits, and that got us down to about 75. And then from there it was working with them to develop plans, and we selected some of them out, some of them selected themselves out. So that in terms of creating, going from, oh, hey, this looks cool, to actual competitors who are viable competitors, it's a phased process, and you can, and the nice thing about prizes as opposed to contracts or some other mechanism is you can create that phased process very naturally. And so I think that's really, really important. But it also, for the ones that were really interested and wanted to go the different distance, it took a lot of hand-holding. And I don't want to underplay the amount of time and energy it took to get those communities, how we want to submit it, but this utility says this, or our city council, your deadline is next week, but our city council doesn't meet for 2 weeks, and so they can't sign off on the document because, well, fine, okay, give you an extension and all that stuff, which is natural, but it does take a lot of time and hand-holding to get to that phase in terms of converting that interest to an actual viable competitor.
The last thing I'll say about that's a particular tactic that we use a lot are our team summits. So prior to the end of registration, like when a team has to actually indicate its interest, because there's some convincing too that needs to happen if you're trying to get, like, there's teams that you really want to compete, but persuading them it's worth their time. Or maybe they have half of the resources that they need, but there's, they need to fill in a few skills with other partners that they don't currently have to make them a stronger competitor. Team summits are a way to bring together interested parties, really do deep dives into what it's going to take to participate and allow networking across interested parties that the federal government has been doing a lot more of prior to the close of registration to enable the creation of stronger teams. And the teams even see that as a huge added value of even being interested in the prize, because now they're networked across communities that they may not have been networked across before, even if they don't choose to register.
So we are running out of time. Chris, I thought it might be good for you to talk a little bit about this idea of trying to network university folks who are interested in doing things with prizes.
Yeah, and this is a relatively nascent idea at this point, but you know, there's a handful of universities trying more and more ambitious prizes, and we all talk to each other from time to time, and I've been thinking for a long time about formalizing that and putting together kind of nothing that requires that much resources, but a quarterly conference call and some other, you know, start to maybe dedicate a student on my end and maybe a couple other students at other universities who can support that, who can do some, you know, tool development, some best practice development, some other things, but also provide a forum for, and I think this is where it's most relevant to APLU, for universities who are interested in getting more into the prize space, who are thinking about, yeah, what would it be to take our apps challenge or our business plan challenge and make that into a more ambitious prize, but have a forum or a place where those people can go and learn from those of us who are doing it right now. And so I don't know if there's any action to be taken on that today, but I did want to kind of, as a closing thought for me, throw that out, that I'm looking at doing that. I'm thinking about bringing people together around that. And we do have this October 7th event that Georgetown, the Case Foundation, and OSTP, I hope I'm allowed to, sort of allowed to say that at this point, are co-hosting on more ambitious prizes and challenges in the public sector, and I'm hoping it's a very limited, and it's limited really to public sector people with maybe a few exceptions, but I'm hoping to use that date as a catalyst to bring some people together. So I don't know if there are any initial thoughts on that in this room, but I did want to just point that out, say that I'm working toward that, and then I would love any input or help from any of you who would be interested in bringing people into that or anything.
Chris, have you looked at the RCNs, Research Coordination Networks at NSF, the grant?
No.
So that's a
I haven't.
program. I don't know if this could be sellable to them, but I could think of ways that you might sell it. But this is bringing together, usually they're not big grants, 50,000 to 200,000, but they're to bring people together to create kind of a learning network around. So there's one, you know, like they're
It's a great suggestion. I will consider that. But yes, but any, like even before that, any just ideas or contacts or people you know at universities who you work with who are interested in this space and might be interested in, you know, coming into a quarterly conference call as we get this off the ground to both learn from those of us who are doing it and contribute to what questions you have and what more resources would you need.
And
that's all I'm asking at this point.
I'll send around Christopher's and Jen's contact information afterwards. So I'm sure you might have some more ideas now that you'd like to send them. I want to give Jen an opportunity to talk about something coming out of OSCP before we wrap up.
So in conjunction with the October 7th event that Chris mentioned, we're coming up on the 5-year anniversary of Challenge.gov. So 5 years of really concerted effort in the federal government to do prizes and challenges. So we're going to do a week of kind of events that week, October 6th through October 8th. And there's an opportunity to highlight commitments by public and private sector entities to help accelerate like the ambition of prizes and the capacity for prizes in confronting issues of kind of national importance. And so we posted, me and my boss, Tom Quill, posted that blog post a couple weeks ago as a way to kind of openly ask broadly for folks that are contemplating kind of taking new steps, a kind of an open call to let us know what they're thinking. I've had several universities reach out to me that I didn't even know there was interest. John Hopkins reached out to me last week. They're like, we're interested in making a commitment. So it may be something that you would just want to share with your university networks if you think that there are particular universities that might be thinking in this space that have either an upcoming prize coming up or they've been thinking in this space, and this might be a good artificial deadline for them to work towards because it gives a White House platform to make an announcement, which can be like, it's attractive to some people. It's not attractive to others, but it can be attractive to some people. So I just wanted to make this post, make this post aware, or make you guys aware of this post. It would be something useful to kind of generate momentum with some of the universities that you work with. And I think tactically, there are some things that potentially we could think about working together on how we make universities more aware of the ability to be participants in these types of activities. You only know what you know. I mean, a lot of you guys probably walked in the room never having heard of prizes, like you said. You only know what you know. So how do you actually make, research deans or folks at universities more aware of the fact that we're folks that are looking at other ways for undergraduate education, teams, student teams, to actually participate in some of these challenges as a learning tool. There are many prize competition examples where, specifically at NASA, where the university teams that compete are run through a kind of space industry technology development process by competing, and so they learn like critical design review, that all the design reviews that like Boeing and Ball and all those guys are looking for when they hire students coming out of those university engineering programs. So that they see that someone has participated in Lunobotics, they know that they have experienced, at least in an initial level, kind of the design review process, which is different than just having studied it in the classroom. They actually built something as part of it. So I do think on one hand there's how do we increase awareness at the university level that this is even an opportunity for teams to compete, and then how do universities actually encourage teams, whether it's through actual formal education or whether it's as a encouraged extracurricular where maybe discretionary funding was made available to teams to support their work, right, or support their ability to compete in those challenges, where the university can really benefit from the dozens and dozens of challenges that these teams could be participating in that are currently, you can go online to your computer right after this and look at all the ones that are live right now. I mean, there's tons. It's not just for engineering students. It's for art students. It's for economics students. It's for material science students. I mean, there's tons of different topics out there that would be, that would put these students head to head against folks that have been thinking about this stuff for 20 years too, and they could beat them, right?
And there's this other, I think,
and oftentimes too.
The energy prizes are a good example of universities using this as an opportunity to engage their
communities,
in a way that they might not have been able to do.
Yeah.
So, thank you very much, Jen.
Thank you.
Like I said, I'll make sure I distribute Jen's and Christopher's contact information afterwards so that people have it. And I was also hoping, I was going to extract your sources from your slideshow, but I was wondering, do you happen to have a prize bibliography or something where you just have a number of...
I have a 7-pager. Started as a 2-pager that has lots of, it has lots of links that I can send you.
Okay, that'd be great.
Yeah. It's like the overview.
Yeah. And I don't know if you can hang around for a few more minutes if people do want to chat with you a little bit longer.
I got a couple minutes.
So I was going to say, Chris, if you have a blurb of what you're looking for, then we have networks we can send out.
Yeah.
What you're looking for is more